Hi, we would like to welcome Kim Brody today from Milky Way Ranch. Hi, Kim.
Hello, hi Amy. Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
I am excited to speak with you about your herd. Can you start by giving us a couple basics, where you're located, how you got started, all that good stuff?
Sure. I'm in Lexington, South Carolina, and I have a farm name and a herd name. And when I set them up originally, I thought they'd be the same. But I had, when you pick a herd name with ADGA, you have to pick a couple backups too because one might be taken or too similar to one. There wasn't a Milky Way ranch currently in use. There was a Milky Way that had been used years back, so they thought that was too close. So I got my second choice, which I also like, which is Dairy Tails. So any of my registered goats will have the name Dairy Tails. But my farm, I established an actual LLC, limited liability company for my farm, and I'd already registered that company as Milky Way Ranch. So it might be a little confusing that Milky Way Ranch goats will have papers that say Dairy Tails.
How did you first get started with Nigerians? Did you have other goats or livestock?
I never had livestock before, so I'm a first generation goat farmer. Um, Going on my sixth, seventh year. I started in 2014 with my first mom and baby. I got them together, and I wanted them to have friends, so I bought some acreage, and I bought them friends, and I had them for a year or two, and I got them boyfriends. Well, I got them one boyfriend, and he greatly increased our herd size.
When you were first shopping for goats, did you just kind of pick out whatever you thought was cute? Did you do a lot of research? Did you hook up with some local breeders? How did that work?
I did. Well, my mom is the one who first put the idea in my head. She was not, she was struggling with her health, and I had gone moved her here to be with me, and she hadn't wanted to raise dairy goats. At least that's what she said she wanted. When I started putting it together, it seemed like it was more of a passing fancy. She liked it more as a fantasy, but so originally when she wanted that, we lived in a suburb, and so I looked for miniature dairy goat because I wanted an animal to fit in our yard. And then I came across search results Nigerian dwarf goats, and when I first saw them, I said, "Oh my goodness, so cute!" I was not immune to their cuteness. But I also read the stats on they make an amazing amount of milk for their size, so the feed to milk ratio is pretty good, and their milk is the richest and creamiest of the dairy breeds. So not just are they cute, but there's some other practical upsides to the breed as well. And speaking of practicality, if you're taking them to a vet, you can put your dwarf goat in your car. Car might never be the same again, but you don't need to invest in a livestock trailer to transport these goats. And let's say they're being stubborn and they don't want to hop up on the milk stand on their own. You can pick them up and put them on there. And that wouldn't be as easy with a standard size breed as it
That
would
is
be
true.
transportation. So then my next step was I went to visit a local breeder. The Generations Farm is where I got my first two goats, and then two more from them later on, and my livestock guardians.
Nice.
And I
So,
took it from there.
so once you got a couple goats, you started breeding them, you started milking them. Did your goals change for what you wanted to do with the goats, or were you always more focused kind of on the homesteading side of it? Or have you done things like showing and appraisals and that type of thing too?
I did sign up for linear appraisal. I'm interested in, and I'm doing milk test. Although those things, the appraisal for 2020 got canceled because of COVID,
Hmm.
and the milk test hasn't been running so smoothly because I've been using Langston, and their primary person retired, and it was being run by students who were there sometimes, but campus was closed. And now I'm hearing that nobody can reach Langston, so I may have to look for a new GHI. But my original goals were to produce and sell dairy, but I haven't fully achieved my business plan yet because in order to get the grade A dairy license to sell the milk, I need to have a milk barn and certain equipment. So it's a capital investment that I'm not able to make yet, but it's still a goal.
Okay. So going forward, for 2021, I know things are a little wonky because of COVID, but what are you hoping to get out of this kidding season, and what are your goals for this summer?
Good question. Well, I'm breeding primarily for health, temperament, dairy qualities. And I do have some flashy goats in my herd. So my new member, my friend had him for sale, my friend at Terabella Ranch, and his name is Milky Way, and he came with that name. I didn't name him that, and
Oh,
I've
it's
been
meant to
looking for
be.
I've been looking for a second herd sire for a while because everybody is related to my original. So I'm like, we need to bring in new genes, and I thought this is a sign. And Milky
Definitely.
Way is very friendly, very handsome, lots of dairy behind him, and he throws lots of moon spots.
Cute.
So
Is there anything unique about your herd that we haven't touched on yet that you'd like to discuss with us?
uh, I'm a little biased. I would say my goats are the cutest in the world, but they're all cute, so that's not really true. But I do focus on health and temperament, and I shower my goats with lots of love. Many goat breeders do, but some, but not all. So people who meet me and come to my farm will comment on the level of care that I show my animals, and they say nice things about that.
Wonderful. If you would like to, feel free to hop on your website and we can start working through that a little bit if you'd like to. Or
But I want to show you what there is on here because there's a few things I want to point out. I did complete the correspondence course. It was very long. It took me forever because I did a little bit at a time. So I think it took me around a year, but it wouldn't really take a year if you sat down and did it at once, but it would take a couple of days probably.
I'd actually love to hear you talk a little bit about what that's all about because that's a program that I've considered doing and just haven't sat down and dug into it yet. Can you explain what that's all about?
Sure. You get well there's a lot of modules that you go through. So they present a lot of useful data um on raising goats, keeping your goats healthy, and on producing quality milk. And they integrate some of the standard stuff we might know from other classes like FAMACHA. And they go into more details about the common parasites.
Can you talk a little bit about FAMACHA for people who aren't familiar with that?
Oh, I'd be happy to. FAMACHA is named for the person who's credited with discovering this method. And if you hold that thought, I think I even have a video I can play for you on there and some links to show. If we can, I'll circle back to that. But I'll give you the brief overview now because it's really important. It's one of the earliest ways to tell if your goat is suffering from a high parasite load. Particularly, it's designed particularly to identify a barber pole worm infection. So barber poles are a member of the strongyle family, along with brown stomach worms and thread worms. But most common goat threat is barber pole worms, especially if you live in the southeast part of our country where it's warm and wet, and those things really thrive. So they are our nemesis as southeastern goat breeders. But what FAMACHA is the gentleman who came up with this method had found a strong correlation between the color of the inner eyelid tissues and level of anemia, and a correlation between that and the parasite load, because these insidious parasites will suck blood from their host from the inside. And that's how they eventually killed the host before you might even notice any outward signs of illness. It doesn't cause diarrhea like worms and dogs would. You wouldn't see anything. You might see your goats' coats are looking a little dull, or they might seem a little off, but they can be close to a couple days away from death before you'd see any outward signs if you weren't on top of FAMACHA. So it's a really important tool, and it's really easy to do. It costs you nothing. But there is a particular way to look at the inner eyelid rather than just pulling the eyelid down. You want to close their little eye, push gently on their upper lid. It feels kind of like squeezing a grape. It's kind of gross, but you got to do it. And that makes, then when you pull the lower lid down, it makes all the gooey inner, forgive me, it sounds disgusting, make the gooey inside of their eyelid pop out where you can actually see enough to tell the color. If you just go like this, you're only seeing the very outer edge, and that might look deceptively pink, where if you actually looked at it the right way, you might notice that your goat needed to be treated. So it's important to expose the inner eyelid the right way and assess the color. And if it is pale, you got to treat them ASAP. And what is an effective treatment for barber pole can vary farm to farm. But the current recommendation is at least 2 different dewormers from different classes, and you give them together because these worms have gained resistance.
It seems to be a pretty serious problem down in the south. We're up in Wisconsin, and thankfully we haven't had too many struggles with that.
Oh, thank goodness. So yeah, that's an advantage of being in the northern half of the country or somewhere less warm and damp. Do you have other area challenges? Maybe with the cold, do you get pneumonia in the herd?
I would say, depending on the weather in spring, pneumonia is probably a bigger concern, and just upper respiratory stuff. If we have real wet kind of weather that's inconsistent and kind of bounces back and forth between hot and cold and wet and dry, that's when I tend to see problems with my kids more, even than my does. But that's probably a bigger problem, at least in my herd, than worms. I really have a pretty parasite resistant herd. I feed off the ground. I don't keep, a lot of manure and stuff in their pens. I keep their pens pretty clean.
Good.
And I know that some of my goats have gone off into other herds that the parasite resistance is a very important thing to them, and they don't want to have to be treating with chemical dewormers. So they have been very happy with my stock because they tend to be more naturally resistant. So I don't know if that's just certain bloodlines or what, but thankfully we don't have to do a lot with worms, at least on my farm. So
That's awesome.
Mhm.
Well, it can be genetic, but in this course they mentioned it can take several generations before you see a difference. So if you've been breeding for parasite resistance for a while, you could
I
have
personally,
you could have a genetically resistant herd.
that was not a primary goal of mine. I just lucked out and happened to have genetics that, at least from what I'm seeing, tend to lean more towards a pretty resistant herd. So I mean, I'm happy about that, obviously, but that was not something that was one of my original goals. But the less meds and the less dewormers I have to give my herd, the happier I am. So
Definitely. And there's some ways to control it, even here where it's really bad, to minimize the use of chemical dewormers. But here in South Carolina, you're not likely to get away from the chemical dewormers, but you do want to reduce their usage. And Famacho is one of those ways by only giving it when needed, not on a schedule like monthly or quarterly, and rotating pastures, keeping the pens clean like you do, and other non-chemical methods like feeding lespedeza, the Sericea lespedeza. There's a particular strain of it called AU grazer that they can make it in a pellet form like alfalfa pellets, or if you're lucky enough to live near a farm that grows it and you can buy the fresh hay, uh, those have been shown to actually reduce the worm burden and reduce the amount of chemical dewormers needed.
is that something that you currently use in your own herd or no?
I do when it's available. I
Okay.
do have a farmer a couple hours away. I have on my to-do list to visit when he has in stock, but I haven't been getting there when he has it. And the Sims brothers owns the patent on the AU grazer, and they'd had a bad year in 2020, so there was not much availability. So the homepage is where most things happen. I got distracted pointed out my little sticker I put in. I have permit when you complete that course, Langston, you get a certificate, and you're allowed to put the logo on your page.
And that's offered through Langston University if people want to take that course?
Yes, and my Facebook page, I think I put a link to that, so I'll find that if I can.
And that course is free, isn't it?
It is.
So that's extra cool.
Right. Yes. I think I had to pay a small fee for the certificate, maybe $20.
Sure.
This I wanted to show. This is not by any means all inclusive, but it's just got some fundamental information for new goat families, and it's available to anyone who needs it, whether they adopt from me or not. So it's for free here on my webpage. So I just put basics about housing, nutrition. So you talked about my feed program. This is what I do. Coastal Bermuda hay is what's available in my area. I feed that 24/7 free choice, and I put it up in hay feeders because we have it's a very damp climate. So hay drops on the ground here. It's best for them not to eat it, even though it wastes a lot of hay. Uh, Grain mix. I had been, when I had only 4 goats, I fed them New Country Organics, but I currently have, well, 2 babies are leaving in a few weeks. I currently have 36 goats, so I'll be down to 34. Um, but at $50 a bag, importing it from Virginia, I couldn't feed New Country anymore. But I did find another farm in Virginia called Sunrise Farms, and I'm a distributor for them. And I ordered by the pallet, so that reduces shipping. But I didn't have a good year this winter. Not every The goats didn't put on weight, particularly my bucks didn't put on weight like they used to, and they didn't grow in their winter coats as fully as they did. And some of them I've been having to jacket or bring inside during the really cold nights, and I've never had to do that before. So I'm not. And my vet, I called in and she said there's too much corn in that mix. It's the number one ingredient, and it's not digestible. So that was her opinion. So I'm not. I still like Sunrise Farm. It's non-organic, and non-organic. It's not organic, but it's non-GMO. And you look at it, and you see real grains. It's not mystery pellets. So their quality appeals to me, and their customer service is good. But if I order from them again, I'm going to get a custom mix, or like I suggested here, use a bag of their dairy feed and mix it with a bag of alfalfa and a bag of or another grain, barley, if available, to cut down the ratio of corn. So that said, too much corn is bad. So if I mixed that, it would be less corn. The idea is, though, you want to maintain a proper ratio when you're feeding of calcium to phosphorus, if about 2 to 1. Too high of phosphorus is implemented as the bad guy in leading to kidney stones, which in goats we call it urinary calculi, or UC. And female goats can get it as well, but it's more problematical for boys based on their anatomy, and especially for wethers, boys who were neutered too young and hadn't fully developed the urinary tract. So why it's dangerous is just the tiniest little stone could block them up completely, and that's a life-threatening condition. So it's best to reduce the chance of forming stones. It's a lot easier. Prevention's worth a pound of cure. So one way to do that is by paying careful attention to your calcium to phosphorus ratio. Another way is to include ammonium chloride in your feed, or treat periodically by adding an amount in the water for your bucks. So loose minerals, that's another bullet point here. I was using originally the New Country Organic minerals, and those are okay. And then what was locally available here was Monopro. But I noticed the Monopro minerals didn't have any cobalt in it. I don't think it had enough zinc. So I think that was contributing to the winter coats not growing in so well this year. So I'm revisiting that. I've now started using a mineral. I had to order it. It's not available locally, but Sweet Licks brand, and they have 2 versions. They have Meat Maker and Magna Milk. I heard the Meat Maker has the most zinc and cobalt. I told my goats to ignore the name. they're not a meat herd. They're my family. But I'm just trying that out. I've only been using that for a couple weeks, so I can't tell you yet what difference it'll make, but I'm hoping for a much better winter next year. So minerals are important because deficiencies can cause all kinds of problems. That reminds me, another non-chemical way of fighting the barber pole enemy is copper bolusing your herd. When I first heard of that, I thought that sounded horrible. I don't want to shove copper water particles down my goat's throat. But it actually makes a difference. It goes in a little capsule, and they just swallow the capsule. You can sneak it in a slice of banana or a fig Newton, and down the hatch it goes. And it's been shown to make goats a less comfortable place for barber pole worms. And that will again reduce your need for chemical dewormer. So I do recommend the copper bolus once or twice a year, depending on the copper in your area. Treats. I offer my goaties treats. Not as often as I used to when my herd was smaller. because it's hard being mobbed by 20 goats. They all want the same slice of orange or the same raisin, but small amounts of fruit treats are safe. Lots of people, for some reason, like to feed their goats animal crackers, and a couple animal crackers here and there won't hurt. You don't want to give them a whole bag of animal crackers; that would unbalance them. So you got to be with feeding your goats, as you know, Amy. Um, a- it's a balancing game, not only balancing the calcium and phosphorus, but balancing the grain and starch and protein to fiber. They need a lot of fiber to keep those rumens going, and they get that by eating hay. So the main part of their diet is hay, and the grains and the minerals and treats are supplements. They need fresh water all the time. That also helps reduce the chance of getting a kidney stone by adequate hydration. And then the last bottle point only applies to babies if you get them before they're weaned. I don't generally pull bottle babies. Some farms pull all babies and put them on a bottle. I leave them with their moms unless they get rejected or need extra help, or the moms had a lot of them. One year I pulled a baby from each set of triplets just to raise them together, and so the triplets wouldn't have to fight over the two um, milk spouts available to them on the mama. So um, if you do bottle feed, it's ideally to get them their mom's milk or another goat milk that you know is CAE negative or pasteurized. But if that's not available, the next best thing is whole pasteurized cow milk from the store. I always use that if I had to bottle feed. I've never used formula, so I'm not speaking from my own experience, but as what vets have told me and other breeders have told me, formula increases the chance of overeating disease, bloating, floppy kid syndrome. These are things that can go wrong if a kid drinks too much at once, and it's more likely to happen. It's more likely to cause that abdominal upset if you're feeding formula than whole cow's milk.
We have had the same experience up here. I feel exactly like you do. I have not heard any good experiences with the replacers, and if you can't get the pasteurized goat milk, then we do the vitamin D milk from the store as well. So
That's
it's interesting to talk through these basic goat care sheets that the breeders are putting up, because so much of this is universal information, but then there is quite a bit also that varies from region to region and what food sources and brands are available. So also things like the selenium in your soil, the need for copper, those types of things. So if you are shopping for a goat, it would be worth it to kind of look at different breeders in your area and see the different feeds and things that are appropriate for your climate.
that's good advice because it varies. Just like you said, and why some people watching might wonder why does what's in our soil make a difference to the goats and what they're eating, and that would because the hay grows in that soil and the nutrients soak up from the soil into the hay. So a hay that grows in a copper or selenium deficient area won't have enough of those nutrients in it, and you'll have to supplement through the feed and minerals. Right. And then, so what feed and how much minerals you need, and whether or not you need a copper bolus, is dependent on where you live and how much copper is in the soil and therefore in the hay that you're feeding. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely.
And
And
then,
some
like
of
you
it's
said, also
price
build.
driven as well. Like in Wisconsin, we can get very nice quality alfalfa or grass alfalfa mix, um, like a 50-pound bale for $6 maybe.
Oh
Other
my
parts of the
God.
country, I mean, they're paying 4 times that.
Yes, it's
So
not that here. It's like $15, $20 minimum if you can
yeah.
find it.
So we have that luxury where that can be a wonderful foundation for our feeding programs at a pretty economical cost. Where other people, like you're doing the coastal Bermuda hay. Some people I know are doing more like Timothy Orchard type stuff.
That would be
Um,
nice too if I had it. We don't grow that
mhm.
here. Oh, yeah, so that is regional. I want to move to Wisconsin. No barber pole and alfalfa bales are $6 a bale. I'm coming up there. Move over.
Obviously, the super dairy alfalfa is going to be a little bit more, but it's still probably cheaper than what you guys are paying.
Yeah,
So,
that's a pretty nice perk.
oh
And then,
yeah.
then I went down to talk a little bit about the parasites. Coccidia is number one parasite for kids. but it's treatable and preventable. Just keep an eye on that. If you have a kid that has loose poop, and for goat, loose poop is anything that's not dry pellets. So if it looks like dog poop, it's diarrhea for a baby goat. And you want to consider Coccidia. Barber pole worms I mentioned. Vaccines. The only vaccine we give here routinely is CDT to prevent enterotoxemia and tetanus. Uh, Probiotics. Probios is one brand, is not the only brand, but you can give probiotics with any routinely or at any time of stress or along with any medicine you're giving if your animals are sick to help keep their tummies happy and working. And external parasites, goat lice, occasionally mites. I haven't seen mites, but mites might be harder to see than lice. Lice you can see, they look like human lice, but the good news is they're not, they are species specific and you cannot catch them. But you also want to get them off your goats if you see them. And the easiest way I've found to do that is the ivermectin poron. It's the least mess, and you can do it once a month or once every 2 weeks if you have a bad problem until you get it under control. Vet recommended also you can spray with permethrin 10, diluted appropriately per the bottle label, and spray on your wood posts in the area where those eggs might hide. If you have too many lice on your goat, it will make them itchy, and there's a variety of goat lice called sucking lice. Rather than crawl around and eat your goat, they actually latch on and drink the blood, and that can contribute to anemia. So you really want to keep an eye out. If your goat's itchy, just part their fur and look at their skin and treat them accordingly. Don't panic, but don't let it go either. Put something on them and get rid of that. Grooming. I don't bathe my goats. Some people might bathe them prior to showing. Um, I have one friend, she adopted 3 boys from me and weathered them. And when her dog groomer comes to wash the dog, she has them wash the goats too. And I laugh. She says, "Well, I want my boys looking handsome." It always cracked me up. But generally, you don't need to bathe um, goaties, but you do need to keep their hooves trimmed. I know you know this. I'm talking to the choir here, but for anyone joining us who hasn't experienced this yet, goats need their hooves trimmed. You don't have to call in a farrier like you do for horses. You just have to keep the outer wall of their hoof level with the pads and make sure they have a clean, level surface on the bottom of their foot to walk comfortably on. And that happens depending on each goat. It can be 6 weeks to 8 weeks. Some goats may go a little longer. I do have some goats who seem to grow their hooves faster than others. And brushing. Brushing's not required, but it can be fun. Some goats like it. They seem to be perpetually itchy even if they don't have lice, and they always enjoy a good scratch. So if you want to run a brush on them, it's a nice way to bond and spend time with your goats. And there's an added benefit. Generally, up until this winter, I would say always, they grow a thick layer of cashmere in the winter to stay warm, and they start to shed that in the spring. And you can comb that out with the same kind of undercoat rake you'd use on a dog. And if you either know how to card or spin wool or know somebody who does, you can get yourself some cashmere wool, as well as your goats will like you for it. Here in the southeast, we don't get as cold as you do up there. So when I first started farming, we just had several large, extra large dog houses, insulated dog houses that goats can snuggle in to get out of the rain or get out of the cold, or even stay cool in the heat. And then I had, in the summertime, shade sails and various things that can get out of the sun. This winter being extra cold and rainy, I have put up some larger shelters so that I had observed in my buck pen several bucks trying to get into the same house and fighting over it rather than going to the next little dog house over, and some little hind ends were sticking out in the cold rain. So I put up a big shelter where they all fit under it. But in my long-term plans, hopefully not too far away, I'd like to have an actual barn. Although not required here, I think it would be handy for a herd that's growing to my size, and it will, it's set up the right way, help me get that grade A license and put my dairy plans in action. But if you're just having the little family pet or the home dairy with a couple of goats, you don't need a whole barn in my area, just something for them to duck in out of the rain. Other notes there about poisonous plants. And again, that's going to vary regionally too. So if you are lucky to have a university extension agent near you who will come out and walk your land with you and point out things that could be dangerous, that would be the best resource for your individual area.
Well, that's a great idea. I never thought of that. But if you do have a new pasture, what an awesome resource to work with.
I've heard people mention it. I haven't had the luck of getting in touch with an agent here who will come with me, but I know I'm familiar with most of what grows here from research and talking to other people in my area. My number one nemesis here is wild cherry, and we have holly also. So I look out for those. And that was all in my basic care. Did you have questions or
No, I think
comments?
that was very thorough. Like I said, I love it when breeders put this up on their websites because it is such a good resource for new breeders. And I like that hopefully you can find someone local to you to give you a better idea of what's appropriate for your area. Like obviously we have cold and snow and things to worry about up here. If you're down in Florida or something, that's maybe a different issue that you don't have to worry about. Maybe it's more the heat and the humidity and the barber pole worms and that type of
Mm-hmm.
a thing. So
Exactly.
I think that's really nice. The more breeders that have information sheets like this, they're really good resources for people. And it's something to consider for people that are shipping goats in from other parts of the country.
Oh,
So let's say I wanted to buy a goat from you and bring it up to Wisconsin. Well, maybe I'll have some different challenges than I'm used to, or that goat maybe will thrive. Who knows? It really depends on, what the struggles are and what your herd has battled with in your region versus mine. But they might need different supplements up here. They might need different minerals. They might need to transition to my diet versus your diet. So that's another thing if you are considering bringing goats in from a different part of the country.
those are very good points. And then the travel stress on them too, like put them even make them even more sensitive to the changes. So uh, it's all that planning ahead that you mentioned is really good idea. Changing their diet over slowly and being aware of what they might, you know, I ship even my healthiest goat from here, got some travel stress going to Wisconsin, they might bring some barber pole worms with them.
The
That would
other
fool them.
product that you mentioned that I love are the probios. I like to tell all my new buyers that that's such an easy insurance. That's the first thing I throw at a goat if they seem off to me without going into all these meds and injections and all this other stuff. A lot of times it's just kind of gets their digestive system back in order. It's an easy fix. It's not harmful for the
Just they
babies.
just maybe
I'm sorry. But that's worked for me at least as my starting point anytime somebody seems off. It's whether it's the probios brand like you said or it's a different brand, just the idea of having those probiotics on hand, if you're going to a show or if your goat's sick or after they kid or some of the babies, I'll put it right in their bottles. So for me that's been a key thing to have on hand, even more so than antibiotics or whatever.
I agree. Probiotics is my go-to also, and you can't overdo it.
Yeah.
I do have to keep antibiotics on hand here for emergencies because I'd rather have it when I
Sure.
need it than not be able to find it. But I don't use them very often or routinely at all. But probiotics is my first go-to, and often that's all you need. And I can use
Hmm.
it as a preventative too. Situations like weaning or moving will stress them. Here's your probiotics, and that usually makes everything better. Or they accidentally nibbled a little of the wrong thing. Here's your probiotics. And my second go-to, uh, they're looking a little more off. Uh, I do. It is an injection, but I give them a shot of B complex. I hate sticking needles in my goatees, but you can get um, instant instant results often. If your goat's a little bit off, not eating as energetic as normal, a shot of that B complex in the little goat butt cheek is it can be a lifesaver.
And that you get from your
It's
vet?
definitely part of the that I get it from here. I get it from Tractor Supply or the
Oh,
local
okay.
feed store, so it's not prescription. Um, you can get the B complex is more readily available than the straight B12.
Oh, that's
For
what I was
some
thinking.
goatee conditions, you might want B12.
Sure.
That might be RX. I haven't found it locally lately. I used to, but the B complex has B12 and all the other Bs, and I give that as a boost to anybody who's a little under the weather, or if I'm treating them for barber pole, that's part of the treatment because you want to get rid of the worms, but you also have to treat the anemia, anemia and get their red blood count back up.
Okay.
So I do that with the B complex, and then by mouth I give them red cell.
We have a few more minutes. Did you want to talk through some of your goats, or was there anything else you wanted to make sure we hit on before we had to wrap it up?
So, this is my webpage, and this is where I put updates like kids to be expected. Oh, that was our message. These are the upcoming mommies and babies. I just bought all my goats, but I did charities a little too late, and she grew antennas. So we might be banning them, but right now they're not problematical.
Is Facebook the best way for potential buyers to reach out to you, or do you prefer email?
Facebook's probably the best way because it notifies me, and I do see the notifications. They can also send emails from the Facebook or from the web page. So there's a variety of ways. But if somebody who wanted to be on the waiting list for a baby from here, could put a comment here under the photo. Please put me on the waiting list for this doe. So if you expand this, it tells you who's pregnant when. We've had a few not take this year, which is also the same year that we haven't had the thick coats grow in. So I'm attributing it to that change in feed that might be too high in corn. They're not giving them the right balance. So we try again next year. So Epic looked interested in Charity today, but I don't think she got bred, so she's not currently on the kidding list. Spicy, Fire is due next month, and I put little notes. I have unregistered and registered goats. The daddies are only the registered bucks. So I put in the notes here so you know who's pregnant. The next coming up is Fire, and she's one of my unregistered does, but she's a beautiful cream doe, and she's bred to Milky Way, so there potentially can be some spotty babies. People seem to go gaga over those spots, and there's Milky Way. You can't see in his photo; it doesn't look very spotty, but they're there. He's a chocolate cochlear, and he's a cutie, and he's really sweet. He's one of your in I call him one of those in your face goats. If I'm around him, he's like, hello, hi, pet me, do you have treats? It's just adorable. And I just post random pictures and updates about cute things. That's Moonbeam. I brought them in for their shots, and then I like to watch them for 15 minutes or so after to make sure they're not having a reaction. And so I just took a picture of her.
Oh. We're getting baby fever. We haven't started kidding yet, so pretty soon, 2 weeks about, and then we'll have our first babies.
Very soon. This was like one of her first times eating solid food, so I thought it was extra cute. And that's all. So I guess I just wanted to show, those are all of the December babies.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to go through your Facebook page and your website and share some information about your area. I really appreciate you meeting with me.
Thank you for inviting me and taking the time to see. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
You too.
Bye.